Hey everybody, Jekyll's Painting here with part 4 in our Bolt Action Made Easy series, and today we're going to be weathering these tanks, making them look ready for the battlefield. And we're going to start off with some light paint chipping. I've got some Army Painter Necrotic Flesh. This is a great color to accent our army greens. It's very bright compared to those colors. That's what you want for the paint chips. You want a bright version of the brightest color you use to paint the tank. And I've got my piece of torn up sponge in some tweezers here, and I have put the paint onto the sponge, dabbed 99% of it off, so I just leave little paint speckles wherever I touch it to the model. And we're just going to be going around the edges of the tank, some of the flat plates, but mostly around the areas that would see the most wear and tear. You can do as much of this or as little of this as you want, and you can also do a second step where you go in and dot some of those little chips with a darker material to make it look like it's gone down to the bare metal. But we're just doing this light color to indicate paint chipping because we want these done fast, we want them done easy, and we want it ready for the table. Once that's done, we're going to apply a very light wash, and what I mean by that is I'm going to combine some black wash and some brown wash with a very healthy amount of flow improver and water, so it's very thin, it flows over the model very easily, and will not stain very much. So we're actually kind of using this wash as a little bit of a filter to make everything a little bit more drab, a little bit more dirty, and to also accentuate small details like panel lines and nuts and bolts and things like that. Just going to gently apply this wash to the tank, letting it flow all over. If you see anywhere where it's gathering up, like on the little stowage box there on our Chaffee's turret, just gently wick that away with your brush. And if the wash is too concentrated in any one area, get some clean water in that brush and help move that wash around. Because we're not trying to stain this model like we would a normal miniature, like an infantryman or something like that. We're just applying this light filter wash over the whole tank. We don't want to stain big blobs of wash on our flat panels and such. Also, make sure to get the road wheels and the tracks and all of those assemblies deep down in there. We want that wash to accentuate those details and kind of dirtify those areas so it looks nice and real. And once that wash is applied, you want to set your tanks over and let that light wash dry up 100% because we need it bone dry for our next step. And that is going to be another quote-unquote filter of color for this tank. We're going to grab some engine soot. This is just a brown paint from a weathering line that Vallejo makes. You can use basically any paint you want. All we do is put a few drops of paint into a little cup or a cap or tray, whatever floats your boat, and then heavily thin that with water. So basically it just looks like really thin coffee. And I'm going to lightly apply that all over the model, slather it in a general area, and then gently dab that with a paper towel. You can also use a Q-tip or some other tool like that to wick away like 90% of that wash. And what that's going to do is leave a little bit of dirt and grime in the recesses that's going to show up lighter than a wash, and that's going to look like buildup road dirt, all that kind of stuff, that grimy business that you see all over tanks and vehicles in the field. And this is important because you want to wick away all of that extra watery paint, or else it's just going to look sloppy and messy. What we want to do is get that light brown into the details and also stain a little bit, so we're applying a filter again, kind of like a dirty patina to all those plates on the tank. And again, you want to set your tanks aside and let that dry up as well as you can, because we need the tank pretty dry for this next step, and that is going to be some weathering pigment powders. And I started using these not too long ago, a few months ago, and I've absolutely gone head over heels for them. I like putting them on most of my projects for heavy weathering. And I've got this burnt sienna, which is a nice kind of road dirt, European dirt kind of brown. And the way that I apply this is I just dab it into some areas that I want to have some of that dirty, dusty buildup on, and then brush it around. Just lightly brush it around with a soft brush to get most of that pigment off of there, and it's also going to kind of rub the pigment onto your surfaces, onto the vehicle, to give it that dusty appearance in the crevices and details and panel lines and areas where dirt would naturally accumulate while in service. Again, this is one of those steps that you can put as much or as little as you want on the tank. I'm going pretty heavy here because these tanks are supposed to be Battle of the Bulge era. Not seeing a whole lot of cleaning out in that conflict. They're going to be pretty dirty. And one thing to note is that our next step is going to be applying a matte varnish that is thinned down with airbrush thinner. And airbrush thinner is the diluter of choice for these weathering pigments. So when we spray that matte varnish with the thinner in there, it's going to dilute a lot of the very thin, dusty pigment on the model and get rid of a lot of it. So many times I will actually go heavier on the pigment than I intend the model to actually look, because I know that matte varnish is actually going to remove some of it. And once that matte varnish is set, I'm just going to get some black paint in the airbrush. Any black paint will do. A little bit of flow improver, and we're going to do some carbon buildup using the airbrush there so it looks nice and realistic. I'm going to be hitting areas around the exhaust, the intake, the engine areas. You can do the barrel so that you have that nice sooty buildup from all the shells coming out of the barrel. You can also do little carbon shell impacts and things like that if you're careful, but for these things I'm just hitting the areas where that carbon would naturally build up because of shell ejections and engine exhaust. And finally, we're going to pull out some of this Vallejo thick mud. This is the European mud. This is a great weathering kind of paste with some grit and some kind of grassy flecks in it. And I'm just going to go ham on these tracks, like on the road wheels, inside of the underneath of those fenders. If the tank is like an M4 Sherman, it has a bunch of bogies. We want to get all up in there next to the hole, on top of the bogies, around the road wheels. Make sure to get it into all the tracks and basically anywhere where mud would spatter from the tracks turning as the tank goes along. And this is the main reason that I didn't actually paint the tracks or road wheels, because I knew in the end I would just be putting this mud all over it and you wouldn't see it anyways. So why waste time painting those tracks? Now, if this was like a larger scale model tank and I wanted it to look as absolutely realistic as possible, I would probably spend time on the road wheels, on the tracks, on all of that undercarriage stuff. But these are game pieces. You know, people are only going to see them from about 3 feet away. And when you have all that mud on there, it looks great. Like, it's the easy do-it-all step that just makes these tanks look like they are out in the field churning up mud all over their tracks and fenders and fairings and all that, you know, stuff underneath the tank. Probably the funnest step because you can just go crazy and it always looks good unless you just cake the entirety of the tank in it. So don't do that. Alright, and the tank is now complete. You can see that that mud dries with a bit of a wet sheen to it. That is by intent, so that way the mud looks like real wet mud, looks fresh, looks real. And these tanks are straight out of the Battle of the Bulge, man. Like, they've been churning up that snow-soaked, muddy ground. They've got some dirt buildup, a little bit of patina to them, some grime, all that great stuff, and they're ready for the table. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll catch you next time.